1,863.
1966.
U.S. death toll in Vietnam this year, 6,144.
1967.
The end of the Vietnam War was powerfully affected by the multiple forms of resistance that were mounted across the country.
I can't pick up a paper without seeing somebody call you traitors.
These were guys who really thought they were saving lives.
I'd like to have 20 or 30 people with me right now.
You know you're not alone in this.
It's not what it feels like.
They did something very controversial, and they didn't even understand how hated they would be when they did it.
1A! 1A!
1A.
I've been classified 1A. Available for military duty. Report for Armed Forces Physical. Next week.
You can't do that.
I have to. No, you don't.
Resistance is our step-by-step, day-by-day work. It doesn't all depend on you tonight. During this show, it's an opportunity to be active.
Selective service is getting busy. They started putting in alarm systems.
You prepare for a role in a show like this, and you start digging into things that you maybe wouldn't have beforehand.
Peace Crimes Backstage, the Minnesota 8, is a co-production of the Department of Theater Arts and Dance at the University of Minnesota, History Theater, and TPT's Minnesota Channel. Funding has been provided by the University of Minnesota McKnight Arts and Humanities Special Events Fund.
We're just struck by the fact that this was a play that not only happened with University of Minnesota students back in the 1970s, but was really a part of the campus. We're all splitting sort of elements of the production. So History Theater, via Ron, is directing the show. The playwright is involved with it through History Theater, but a majority of the actors in the play are students from the University of Minnesota. All of the designers are students and or faculty of the U of M. Really across the board, we're collaborating on all elements of the production.
This play is about the price you pay for protest. These guys stuck their neck out on the line to speak up against a majority of the country at the time, and they paid a price for it. Not everybody wants to talk about the war in Vietnam. It's a hot button that nobody wants to go there.
1966. U.S. death toll in Vietnam this year, 6,144.
I've never decided on anything so fast in my life. I got an email from Ron proposing the idea about me writing a play about the Minnesota 8. And he explained, I didn't know who they were, he explained they were draft board raiders in 1970 who were protesting the Vietnam War.
When I heard we were doing this show, I tried to look up the Minnesota 8 anywhere on the web, Wikipedia and elsewhere, and I got nothing.
How will you serve your community by going to prison? What good will that do?
You got me against this war.
When we started doing this, things just poured out, and I found out so much, and I was really surprised that we didn't have this before, because, I mean, it's the largest draft board raid in the history of the country.
Is Brad nervous?
Yeah, he's always nervous. That's what makes him so damn brave. The Vietnam War still is a mystery to me. And the more I find out about it, the more I find that it was a mystery to many people.
I'd seen Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump. Can I say that?
I showed the students the other night. We were looking at clips from the Chicago Convention. And one of the things that are so striking about the images is young Americans are beating up on young Americans who are protesting the war. And in a sense, we were almost at a state of civil war.
You can go to Canada. I've got friends
Do what? If I do that, I can't come back.
So you'd rather go to Vietnam?
No, it's just...
I wanted to be kind of monumental but personal.
You could say no. You could refuse induction. Hey, go to jail, get arrested.
Like one of those WPA murals in the 30s.
What way? There isn't another way. I don't have a choice.
But we just told you.
That isn't a choice.
Attention all draft age men of Morrison County.
And it's just this sort of bright picture of what they did.
The laws are human creations. They are often a result, therefore, of the imperfections of human beings and by no means inherently just.
People of the jury, I don't know if you were sequestered last week when the bombing of North Vietnam started again.
On the other hand,
one of the assistant
part of what nonviolence presumes is the possibility of establishing a more just social order that does require the rule of law. Civil disobedience in that regard is not anarchistic. It's not against the rule of law.
Good, good. I think that's closer. And that whole thing about lied, I mean, I'd put an exclamation mark at the end of that.
He lied.
I mean, it came out at the end of the day, you know, because that's what it's ultimately going to get back to. We have a lie here and we have a lie here.
It's an exciting piece of theater for me to get to perform. When I got to read the role of Don last year when we did this reading, and the speeches remain the same as it did last year, and I'm so excited.
So why don't we read through it, and then we can talk about it, and maybe if you want to edit, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Okay.
You know you're not alone in this.
That's not what it feels like.
Then forget about your feelings for a minute. You're part of a community. Like we said at our first meeting, lone wolf macho-style action doesn't change anything. Resistance is our step-by-step, day-by-day work. It doesn't all depend on you tonight.
Wow.
Yeah, just so ease into this.
And the willingness to suffer the consequences of violating unjust laws is part of what nonviolent civil disobedience requires of those who practice it. In this case, the draft.
And of course, the challenges are that the people are all alive right now and looking at it and going, oh, I didn't talk like that.
I'm part of what is known now and a long time ago was known as the Minnesota 8.
I was sort of a student, but I was fundamentally a full-time anti-war organizer.
We were a bunch of kids who raided draft boards, or tried to, in Minnesota in 1970, and got kind of notorious as a result.
In 1970, I was 25 years old. I was a young lay Catholic theologian. I had for many years been petitioning my draft board to be a conscientious objector, but back then, only people from what are called official peace churches, Mennonites, Quakers, and stuff, were considered to be conscientious objectors. Catholics were not considered to be nonviolent.
What was that about canceling?
Selective service is getting busy. They started putting in alarm systems.
Wow. You guys better take an electrician with you.
That's not in the plan.
Joking.
When I was in college, I never went to a protest. When the Vietnam War first came out, I didn't disapprove of the war. Catholics have a thing called the just war tradition, and I basically thought, well, the government wants to go to war, they go to war. I will fulfill my obligation, become a conscientious objector. I wasn't going to break the law.
What was that about canceling?
Selective service is getting busy. They started putting in alarm systems.
Wow. You guys better take an electrician with you.
That's not in the plan.
Joking.
I play Frank Kroenke.
What's wrong?
Frank and I met at a coffee shop a few weeks back, and I just wanted to sit and listen to his stories.
What's wrong? You getting nervous?
Alert. Just alert. I'm still not sure about this Ring of Fire plan.
Is Brad nervous?
He's always nervous. That's what makes him so damn brave.
Breathe, Frank. It's going to be fine.
It's rare that an actor gets the opportunity not only to play someone who was a real person, but to play someone who was alive.
Okay, breathe, Frank.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine. Remember the St. Paul raid? The post office building had alarm systems, and we all got out of there okay. And that was like 20 or 30 people.
Yeah, I'd like to have 20 or 30 people with me right now.
I did 2 years of alternative service as a staff member of the University of Minnesota Newman Center, which happened to be at the time a very unquiet place. It was a huge peace community led by this priest, Father Harry Berry, who's still a Catholic priest. He himself later chained himself to the American embassy in Saigon.
You know you're not alone in this.
That's not what it feels like.
Forget about your feelings for a minute. You're a part of a community.
Reasonable protest and confidence that the government was going to do something to continue a disillusionment that the president wasn't listening to anybody.
You're part of a community. Like we said at our first meeting, lone wolf macho-style action doesn't change anything.
And that the Congress was impotent. They weren't going to really take on the president.
Resistance is our step-by-step, day-by-day work. It doesn't all depend on you tonight.
Wow, you're good.
And that the war just kept getting worse and worse. And so we all moved from this sort of standard protest within the context of the law to outrage.
If you're not ready for this raid, don't do it.
No, we're
you
ready.
Won't be helping anybody.
We've practiced. We've cased the place. We know what we're doing.
I invented a girlfriend for Frank so that he could, I asked him if it was okay. I said, could I invent a girlfriend for you so we can have some male-female scenes?
So let's get going. Drop me off at the women's clinic on your way to pick Mike up. I've got 2 new volunteers to check up on.
Nowadays, you hear about women's shelters being around. If you're part of a church, no doubt they have ties to some of them, and a lot of people go and volunteer at these places. What I learned recently was that this safe house where a woman could go and be supported and have other women be strong around her was just completely new. Diane represents these first women who pioneered a place where women could start gaining their independence.
What am I doing? I could be on my way to California right now.
Frank, are you sure you're okay?
I had literally hundreds of guys a week would come through my office, talking about the war, struggling with that decision what to do. The real reason student radicals like me went from worked within the law to outside the law is the veterans were coming back. In '67, veterans were coming back into this country. They were young, they were part of the youth movement. There was a tremendous influx in '67, '68, and '69 of veterans everywhere, and they were just saying, this war just is insane.
This is infuriating. I can't read any more of this.
What, Mom?
I can't pick up a newspaper without seeing somebody call you traitors. Mindless vandals, misguided young men.
Molly Ivins called us idealists in the Tribune.
Well, she's the only one. The rest are just hateful.
And you believe them?
Of course not.
I asked Pete, I know your mother's mentioned a lot. Could I write a scene with you and your mother? And I'm going to be putting words in your mouth.
I was actually not in jeopardy from the draft because the first Selective Service lottery had taken place the year before, and I actually got a draft lottery number that made me invulnerable. My draft lottery number was 365. You almost couldn't be farther down the list than I was.
But why keep it going any longer than you have to? You made your statement with the raids. Why not? Why not just plead guilty like that other boy and take the 5 years probation and get it over with?
Because we fight back. We resist. We defend ourselves.
If I had been in jeopardy for the draft and conscripted, I would have refused induction. I didn't have any qualms about running headlong into the legal system.
Look, there's such a thing as a defense of necessity, okay? We prove that some crimes can be justified to prevent worse crimes from happening.
He had input on the script, and I can ask him as to what was the source for a line and how he would have said it, so I can actually bring as much truth to the part as I can.
Okay, maybe we were breaking and entering, but how does that compare to the enslavement and deaths of all those draftees? To the crime of war itself?
Nice words, Pete, but it's rhetoric. Anybody can use those words, and anybody can see right through them.
It's not rhetoric if we can explain it.
Oh, you think Judge Devitt is going to sit back and let you explain anything in there?
I think it's worth trying.
Since I wasn't going to be inducted anyway because of my good lottery number, I was happy to be able to do it because I felt like I had to take part in that and really actively oppose the war and conscription both.
So you'd risk being convicted of a felony? Going to prison? For what? A chance to explain?
I can't believe you're saying this. You're the one who taught me. I got my understanding from you, from your work with the teachers union. You always said, serve your community.
How will you serve your community? By going to prison, and what good will that do?
You got me against this war. You marched. You protested. I mean, you went to the rally at Kaufman Union with Bill and I.
With Bill and me?
Okay, right. Right, but you stood there while we turned in our draft cards. You didn't think we were criminals then, did you?
I'm talking about your future. Having a felony record for life. Not being able to vote or hold a government job.
Mom, do you think I'm a criminal?
So I had this guy, Gordy Nielsen from Big Lake, Minnesota, who became a witness at our trial, walked in one day and said he woke up. He had lied about his age when he was 16, joined the Marines. He was in the Igniting Eye. He did all these search and destroy missions. He killed people. He burned stuff. He killed animals. He said the better Marine, the more you could do, the better Marine you were. He believed all this stuff. And then he came home, got married, had what we now know is post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he's freaked. He doesn't know what's going on. And I'm like, he brought the battlefield, and he said, it socked it to my head. This is the language of the 60s, and he said this in the trial. Socked it to my head. I realized it wasn't a hooch, which is what they called the homes, the thatched homes in Vietnam. It wasn't a hooch, it was a home. It wasn't a gook, it was a person. I hear all this stuff and go like a lot of guys, these veteran stories are like, regardless of your politics, this is the personal aspect of what war does to people. And so then Gordy says to me, well, what are you going to do?
Many of the strategies of the anti-war movement have their roots in the strategies of the civil rights movement. You know, one of the things that is clear is that there was a general sense of possibility. The chaos and turmoil that we associate with the time is the other face of that sense of possibility.
Draft raids are very practical. It was a paper-based system. I steal your file, you disappear from the system.
We wanted to, in a more generic sense, to just throw sand in the wheels of the war machine.
Conscription was a tool that the government used to prosecute the war in Vietnam. It populated the Army with people who otherwise wouldn't have done anything like that and made them unwilling servants in warfare.
This was really one of the centers of draft resistance in the country. People were doing all sorts of things. There's people here in Minnesota who would, lone persons would go swing down from the roof and slide into draft boards and just take out the files to nonviolently clog the courts, clog the jails.
Yeah, well, a lot of people remember me with a mustache. Indeed, I never had a mustache.
Hey, Tilton! Listen to this. I'm sending my draft card back with a note.
You're always sending your draft cards back. How many has it been?
Oh, I'm not counting, but this is the best one. Listen, I regret that I have but one card to give for my country, huh?
Our first raid is this group called the Beaver 55 in February of 1970.
Well, I knew about some of these draft board raids were going on, and I had been invited to one earlier, but I was a little too nervous.
It's kind of silly when you look back at things you do when you're young. I had never cased. I'm going to burgle the post office in downtown St. Paul. It's a 14-story building, right?
All the files in Minneapolis, all the files in Ramsey County, and the state headquarters, first time ever, the state headquarters had all their files destroyed.
We're all out. Nobody got arrested. Call the press.
One of the legacies of the civil rights movement for anti-war protests, for the women's movement, for movements against social change in general, was its increasing sophistication about the role of the media in shaping public sentiment.
They're giving all this media coverage to the issue, but there's nobody to say we did it. Well, we got to take advantage of this. This is the opportunity we want. We accept political and moral responsibility for the Beaver 55 action, but we're not going to say we did it. Click, 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 click.
Could do the breathing. And let Mike drive. You don't want to get busted before you can get there.
I don't want to get busted, period. Mike doesn't drive unless it's his freaking bicycle.
Okay, all right. Do the breathing anyway.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'll be better in the car.
And so we did, over time, assemble over 20 people.
We thought, well, let's do some draft boards out around the state and out of the metropolitan area.
A ring of fire. Ring of fire. So when it's in the paper, you see we'll get Wabasha, Winona, Faribault, Alexandria, Little Falls. This was the idea, right? We're early marketing type.
Diane, stay near the phones, okay?
I'll be where I'm needed, Frank.
Right. Yeah, sorry.
That night, the feds they were not everywhere we were. The Wabasha board got ripped off by our people and had a woman in it, so many people women were involved in all of our draft raids.
Somehow the FBI had found out about it.
We didn't really get much of a chance. I mean, we broke in and we're in the office for not very long, and we're working with ambient light from the street.
I was arrested in Winona, Minnesota.
I got to the typewriter and bent the 1 key and the A key.
Diane?
Yes?
We're so damn lucky.
Come on. Mike's got to be wondering where you are.
Yeah. 2 minutes later, the silhouette in the doorway is a guy with a gun. Says, "Don't move or you're dead." It's the FBI.
The raid that I was arrested during was my first and only attempt.
I am talking about your future. having a felony record for life, not being able to vote, to hold a government job.
Mom, do you think I'm a criminal?
Do you know what it's like? In prison? Do you know what they do to young people in there? I mean, it is not rehabilitation. Not by a long shot.
I asked you.
I know you are trying to be brave, but you are not a tough guy. Not like those guys in there.
We knew the FBI had flooded in a lot of people who were trying to find who had done the Beaver 55.
We were surprised when we arrived that night, the night of July 10th, 1970, to find that there was a town festival going on, Steamboat Days.
A crowd gathered around outside, and I walked over and flashed the V sign behind us, and there was a cheer that went out from the crowd, and the FBI got a little bit nervous. We've got to get these people out of town right away.
You're so... Oh, you're so young.
Am I a criminal?
I don't care what you are as long as you're not in prison.
Great. You don't care what I am. I might as well be a criminal. Go underground and be a fugitive.
Oh, now, Pete, you know I didn't mean that.
I'm late. I gotta go meet Brad.
Pete, come back here! Peter! I care what you are. I do care. But I care about your future. Can't you think about that? Doesn't that matter at all?
I started finding out what the war was and what was really going on.
There's a moment in the play where I, as Don Olson, I've accidentally said that, finally get a chance to address the jury directly.
$50,000 bail, which was a lot of money then, still a lot of money. And we had attempted sabotage charge, which was pretty heavy duty.
If this happened today, you said, oh, you'd be a domestic terrorist and you'd be sent off to Gitmo and stuff. Yeah, well, it was the same reaction. Sabotage of the national defense.
During 69, 70, and 71, more than half of all federal prosecutions were for selective service violations, and they were only doing a small percentage of them.
Judge Edward Devitt was my alter ego. He came from St. John's just like I did. He was at St. John's Prep and St. John's College, and he was me in another generation.
Now, this is a thing which stretches back. It has happened again and again, and sometimes people forget.
Our trial became an experiment. Each trial was done a little bit differently.
And he would not allow the other guys to bring any defense at all.
Let's do it from Nixon.
Okay. Last week, President Nixon declared the war as one of America's finest hours because we took a difficult task and we succeeded.
And then, when he sentenced these guys, he said, you gentlemen are worse than the average criminal who taxed the taxpayer's pocketbook. You struck at the foundation of government itself. And if he could have said, hang them! I mean, he hated us.
Before that, in 1969, Defense Secretary Laird declared, we have turned the corner in the war.
I got a 5-year sentence, and the judge gave us the maximum. He didn't like us very well, Judge Edward Devitt.
When it comes to Mike and my trial, we get a different judge, Judge Neville. We came up and said, we want to argue the defense of necessity. And what that is sometimes it's necessary to break one law to do something good. I opened up the trial by saying to the jury, we did it. I'm a great lawyer, right? I said, we did it. Because we weren't interested in getting off. That wasn't the issue. But we want to tell you why.
Before that, 1967, General Westmoreland says, we have reached an important point when the end begins to come into view and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And this is the type of thing that we were told just before the Tet Offensive. Before that, President Johnson said, we are very sure we are on the right track.
When he quotes
McNamara.
McNamara.
Yeah, when it's actually.
Then the rest of those dates can stay the same.
Defense Secretary McNamara, 1964. The United States hopes to withdraw its troops from South Vietnam by the end of 1965. This goes all the way back to 1955. General Navarre, the French commander, saying, I fully expect only 6 more months of hard fighting.
The whole panoply of reasons why we were against the war in Vietnam. We had historians talking about the role of civil disobedience. We had talking about the ecological destruction. We had, Daniel Ellsberg, before he had released the Pentagon Papers, tried to release them in this trial, and the judge wouldn't hear about that. He wasn't going to let that happen.
Since we had destroyed tens of thousands of draft files, by the time we eventually get arrested, there's a lot of people that we helped prevent going to Vietnam.
It's been a series of statements. It covers a 15-year period, the whole decade of the 60s, and this is what we've come out of. We didn't come from Mars. the long-haired hippie weirdos, or whatever people think of us.
The judge does what is called instructions to the jury. That's pretty boilerplate normally. Don't talk about this, all this other stuff. And number 15, all of a sudden he says, now, I want to rule as to the testimony of Francis Cronky and Michael Theriault that you've been hearing here for the last 8 days is irrelevant and immaterial.
The judge wouldn't allow them to consider it. Whoa.
Just like that. Talk about magic. Talk about power.
And the chairman of the jury came back in, and they were crying. And here was a guy who had been in the Korean War, and he was apologizing for being in the Korean War. We never said one thing about the Korean War, but he was so moved by everything which had happened.
All that emotion, all these witnesses, forget it. Just like that. I was stunned. So the jury had nothing to consider except breaking and entering.
I went to college. I was the first one in my family to go to college. My father was a machinist. My mother was a waitress. I was in international relations. I was going to go into the State Department until I started finding out about this war and what was really going on. And now the judge is going to tell you that you are not supposed to take into account how we feel about the war, and that you are not supposed to decide on the war. But I'm telling you that you can, and that you should. That as Americans, that we have got to. We cannot allow ourselves to be lied to by our leaders.
I actually like the cannot.
For me, different from the other guys, prison really, I was at a time in my life where I went into what they call the dark night of the soul journey for 10 years. I was really lost because I lost my church, I lost my country, and I did everything that I possibly could. And I have to accept the fact, sitting in an iron cage, that Frank, maybe you're wrong.
We got out after 20 months. This is when there was still a parole for federal crimes.
You're here and people are out there. The war's going on. Maybe what you did is insane. Maybe you're whatever.
We all got the parole on the same day, on July 23rd, 1973.
I feel like I served my country, and I'm glad that I did. A lot of things didn't turn out the way I had assumed they would, but it's been my great good fortune.
And so that's where that ends up. At the same time, the power of the story is that these people's lives got changed, and they came up and told us that.
Peace Crimes Backstage, the Minnesota 8, is a co-production of the Department of Theater, Arts, and Dance at the University of Minnesota, History Theater, and TPT's Minnesota Channel. Funding has been provided by the University of Minnesota McKnight Arts and Humanities Special Events Fund.
Ticket information for university theater productions can be found on the web at theater.umn.edu or by calling 612-624-2345.